This week, I had an accident shaving. Oh, and I painted a Death Guard model. Hi guys, Jonathan from Two Raven Studios. Welcome! I do painting videos, I do model reviews, and other gaming content. So if that interests you, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. This week I'm going to be painting the Lord of Virulence, the new Death Guard model that was just released. I'd like to thank Lookin for Games, which is my local game store. They actually provided me with this miniature, and it really helps me get these videos out, having someone provide me miniatures like that, so I really appreciate it. Hey, those minis look familiar. So here's the retail space at Looking for Games. They have a ton of board games, pretty much everything you can imagine. They also ship, so if you're not local, you can get stuff shipped to you. So more board games, more board games, more board games, and of course, what we're looking for, the miniatures. So they got pretty much everything. They also have a nice play space with plenty of games in the rental library. You can check out, everything's nice and socially distanced. In the back, if we play D&D, we have the cool Dragon's Den, which you've seen before in my videos. So with this model, I went with the pre-heresy scheme, where it's more of white armor with the green shoulder pads as opposed to the normal green. The reason I did that is I want to use all kinds of different weathering techniques, and over top the white, it gives you an opportunity to do just that. So, over the course of this video, I'm going to go over different ways you can weather things and layering weathering techniques on top of weathering techniques to get a cool effect in the end. So let's grab our airbrush and hop right into the painting. So we're starting off with Bright Warm Gray from Monument Hobbies Pro Acrylic, and I'm just giving this an all-over coat. This is going to be the base layer of the white armor. So it's just a kind of an off-white, gray, slightly warm color. So next up, with Skeleton Horde Contrast Paint, I'm going to add a little bit of shadows here and there in the recesses. So we're taking a low angle and just spraying those recesses with this color, just again to start some shadows. The Skeleton Horde is also going to start kind of our dirty look, you know, darken up for dirt. We're going to add a little bit of Wildwood now into that Skeleton Horde and just darken the shadows a little bit more. So similar process, just covering a smaller area, just adding shadows, and again making the recesses look a little bit dirty. Once we're done this step, we're going to move over to the regular brush, and we're going to base coat all the other areas. We're going to start with Camo Green, again from Pro Acryl. And we're just painting the shoulder pads, and I'm going to paint the gun casing with this color. Next up is Bronze, again from Pro Acryl Monument Hobbies, painting different parts of the metal that I want to be bronze. You can just pick out most of those metal areas with this color. And then for the other metal bits, I'm going to mix dark silver with white gold and base coat those areas. We're just speeding through all these base coats very quickly. And then with dark neutral gray, I'm going to paint in some of the hoses. So the hoses around the top of the mouth, we're going to paint the hoses coming out of the body leading into that weird skin cape thing just at the top. We're going to deal with the rest of it in the next step. So what I'm going to do here is I'm starting with dark purple, and I'm adding it over the top parts of the cape, and then we're going to add magenta into the lower parts and blend the two together while they're still wet. So we're adding magenta into the lower areas, the dark purple into the top areas, and just blending it all together while it's still wet. And then with the dark gray color at the top, we're going to mix that in and blend it back up to the parts we've already painted dark gray at the top. This does not have to be super neat. We're just trying to move fast and get different colors on here. Just kind of a smooth gradient. So we're going to add some highlights now. We're just going to add light bronze to the areas that we painted bronze. Make them a little bit brighter, just kind of sharpen up the edges and put some spots of highlight here and there. We don't have to be super neat with this because we still have a bunch of weathering that's going to happen. We're just trying to make some areas brighter because we're going to darken this down a lot in the next few steps. And then the parts that we painted the silver color, we're just going to highlight with white gold. The reason I'm using white gold as opposed to a brighter silver is this has a little bit of a warmer tone, which is what I want for this miniature. So rather than a cold steel, I'm looking for warmer metals. So the blending and everything in those last few steps isn't perfect, but that's okay, because with the next step, we're going to go back in the airbrush and smooth everything over. My painting style is kind of not about being very precise and having everything look neat and perfect. I'm trying to create an overall feel, and I'm not going to waste time creating perfect blends when I know the next step is going to cover a lot of that up. We're going to hop back into the airbrush. This is going to need a little bit more precision than the previous steps with the airbrush because we don't want to cover everything up. But if we hold the airbrush nice and tight to the miniature, we can get some good effects. So let's hop over and do that now. So those blends on that cape that aren't smooth, we're going to smooth them out right now. So we're going to start out with magenta through the airbrush and focus mainly on the parts between the hoses and smooth out the blends and kind of brighten up certain areas to make them look like a fleshy cape. We want this to kind of look disgusting because it is a servant of Nurgle after all. I'm going to use pale pink now and just repeat that step, focusing on smaller areas. So you can kind of see I'm trying to focus towards the center of the cape, some of the lower areas of those hoses, and we're just spraying on this and making it look a little bit more flesh-like. We get a little bit of overspray onto the rest of the model, that's okay. And now we're going to move on to the shoulder pads. I'm starting with black green and I am shading down the center parts of it. We're just adding some shading into the shoulder pads that we had based the camo previously. All of these Pro Acrylic paints flow pretty nicely through the airbrush. They're just thinned down with a little bit of Vallejo airbrush flow improver. Again, overspray at this point is okay because we have plenty more steps of weathering to go. And we're going to add some highlights to those same areas now with bright yellow green. Again, we're inevitably going to get a little bit of overspray, but that's okay. Just try to focus most of it on the parts that are painted green. And once we finish this step, we'll move on to some weathering. And if you're familiar with me and how I paint, you're probably wondering, where are the oil paints? Here they come. So the way I'm using the oil paints right now is to create filters. So what I'm doing is I'm going to put different colors over the piece and then wipe it off, just leaving a little bit left over on the surface and a little bit in the recesses. And we're really just trying to create different tones within that white to give a little bit of variation there. So that's what we're going to do with the oil paints. Let's hop in and do that now. So we're starting in with burnt sienna and sap green, and we're just kind of putting it randomly along the surface of the white armor. It's thinned down with a little bit of mineral spirits, and I'm just trying to quickly cover as much area as possible. Then what I'm going to do is grab a Q-tip and just swab off most of it, leaving it in the recesses. You can kind of see the direction I'm pulling it down. That way, if there's any streaks, it looks like it's just grime and dirt streaking down the armor. You can dip the cotton swab in a little bit of mineral spirits to help clean off a little bit more if you want to get even more of it cleaned off. We're just going to repeat that process over different areas. So using both ivory black and sap green, we're just going to go over all the metal parts. Next up, we're going to go onto the fleshy bit. So I'm using purple matter here, which is like a magenta color. You could use any color that's similar. But we're just, again, base coating all of those areas. Again, this is thinned down a little bit with mineral spirits. Try to cover fleshy parts in the front, the cape, all of those bits, any of the little cracks in the armor where there's flesh protruding. And then what we're going to do is take a makeup sponge, and similar to what we did with the Q-tip earlier, we're just going to wipe most of it off. The makeup sponge is nice because it kind of helps you get some nice smooth blends from where you're pulling it off to where you're dragging it to. Now, unlike the way I normally use the oil paints, we're not going to be able to just go right back in and start painting with the acrylics over top. It's going to bead up because there's too much oil on the surface right now. To be able to continue moving and not have to stop, what I'm going to do is actually just varnish the whole thing to seal it in. What I'm going to be using is Tester's Dull Coat to do that. It's my favorite varnish. So I'm going to varnish it, and then I'm going to glue it onto the base. The base I painted separately. You can check out the video here for how that was done. And let's hop back in now with the acrylics that is done, and we're going to start highlighting, but this is also weathering the way we're doing it. So we're going to start in with the bright warm gray, which, if you remember, is the color we originally base coated the armor. And I'm doing broken edge highlights, which I do a lot. So this is going to do two things. One, it's going to define the edge of the different armored plates, but it's also going to further the weathering, because what we're doing is we're making the edge of the armor look chipped by not, instead of doing straight lines, by doing little lines here and there, we're going to help that armor look chipped and worn and kind of help further the effect of the weathering we've done in the last few steps. Quickly move around. This doesn't have to be super neat. Again, we still have plenty of weathering to do. We're going to do now the same thing to the green parts. We're just using camo green with a little bit of that bright yellow green mixed into it. Again, these are all colors we've used before, which is going to help tie everything together. We're just now going in with a brush and, again, doing those broken edge highlights in the same way. And we're just going to further those highlights a little bit with the bright yellow green by itself. So picking out smaller areas. This two-step process really helps it make a little bit more chipped than just the one step. You can kind of help refine it a little bit more by just picking out smaller areas, going over and highlighting certain parts. And we're going to go over the flesh with a mix of magenta and pale pink. We're just kind of going over the big ridges and defined edges here. Trying to help make the skin look a little bit sickly, you know, as befitting Nurgle. And then with the pale pink, we're just going to repeat that last step over a smaller surface area. It's very similar to what we've been doing the past few steps. We're just trying to make everything look nice and disgusting and nurgly. And now we're going to go back over all the metal parts with the white gold that we used earlier. Again, doing the same thing, these broken edge highlights. So again, this is not only giving us highlights to define edges, it's also helping with the weathering. Once we are done this step, we're actually going to move back into the airbrush once more to get some further weathering. Again, like last time, we're going to need some tight control to put the paint where we want it. So I'm starting off here with medium rust liquid pigment from Green Stuff World. I really like this Green Stuff World liquid pigments, but you could use any paint here, really. It's really just dries very matte, and I like how it goes on. But what we're doing is we're going over all the different parts of the armor, just adding in patches of rust here and there. Now we're going to further define those patches of rust with light rust. Again, we want to go in all the little cracks in the armor. Anywhere else we want kind of patches of rust. Again, this is going to dry very matte, which is going to give us a nice effect. And we're going to now repeat that step with dark green dust, kind of adding to the bronze parts and here and there on the white parts of the armor. Starting to get a little bit of the verdigris look that, you know, the weathering that bronze would get. And we're going to repeat that step now with verdigris from, again, Green Stuff World liquid pigment. See how close I have the airbrush to the model? That's really what you want to do here to keep the paint where you want it. But again, if we combine this with the last step, we can get some pretty cool effects. After this is done, we have one more step of weathering with oils again. So with these paints, we have burnt sienna, which for rust, purple matter for blood, ivory black for oil, a mix of white, green, and blue for some verdigris, and Naples yellow for some pus, along with some mineral spirits. So what I'm doing here is putting the undiluted paint into the recesses, and then with some mineral spirits, just adding it in so the paint starts running down and out to create streaks. So we're going to go over all the model with all these different colors doing this. Afterwards, I'm going to go back to some of the acrylics I used earlier just to add some more highlights, and then the model is done. So you can keep refining this with the mineral spirits here until you're happy, and then again, I'm using the acrylics a little bit more afterwards. And here's the finished model. I'm really happy with how this turned out. All these different layers of weathering one over top the other really give you the sense of that dirty Nurgle warrior who's been fighting the Long War for quite some time. I really like how that flesh cape turned out in the end, which I wasn't happy in the beginning, but the end result's pretty cool. And overall, I'm extremely happy with the way this miniature looks and the way it complements the base which I made in the last video. I hope you guys found that useful. If you did, I would appreciate a like. If you like how this miniature turned out and you actually want to own it, you can. So it's going to be up on Lookin for Games web store. I'll leave a link below. Part of the proceeds are going to go to the charity Extra Life, so you'll be getting a cool miniature and you'll be helping out a great charity too. So you can check that out. And until next time, keep on gaming and paint your minis.